Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Peter Davis, Managing Partner of Interplay. I'm on a mission to help entrepreneurs advance society, and this podcast is definitively part of that effort. I'm very excited and honored to have Alan Feld from Vintage Investment Partners on the podcast today. Vintage is based in Israel, and regardless of how you feel about the conflict in the region, we can all agree it's a human tragedy. The conversation today isn't about who's right and who's wrong. The conversation is about the impact of this conflict on an otherwise thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem and what this will do after that. Alan shares a lot of really interesting perspective on those topics around the ecosystem in Israel, the impact of a wartime environment, but he also sheds a lot of light and, frankly, wisdom about team dynamics, humility, and character. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Alan, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's start off at the top. Would you mind giving an introduction of Vintage?
Sure. So we managed about $4 billion. $2 billion is a little bit over $2 billion is funds of funds. We raised our seventh fund of funds, $630 million last October. About $1 billion roughly is secondary funds. We raised our fifth secondary fund 2 years ago, and it's roughly $312 million. And we also have, and our third area of activity is direct investing, B rounds and above, together with the managers which we're investors in. And in growth rounds. And we have about $1 billion there, raised our third fund a few years ago and investing out of that. And in addition to that, we also have this free service where large corporates tell us what their technology pain points are. And we help our underlying portfolio companies in the funds in which we've invested, help them meet those large corporates, potential customers. We don't take a fee for it. It's a free service, just the way we try to add value to the ecosystem, to the funds which we've invested in, to companies that they've invested.
Now, your firm's been around for about 20 years?
20 years.
Right?
This year was our 20th anniversary.
And congratulations. And you're based in Israel.
Yep.
Are you typically managing Israeli capital? Where capital sources? Are they generally U.S.?
Capital is primarily North America, Europe, and somewhat Israel. But it's a global capital raise.
Got it. So it's for folks, funds that are capital that is interested in getting access and exposure to Israel chases to you?
No. Actually, the vast majority of our investing on the fund of fund side is actually in North America and Europe. The Israeli investment portion is actually on the fund of fund side is about 15% of what we do, 15% of what we do. So actually, it's, because we've been fortunate to work with a lot of great VCs globally. And so we built very good relationships with a lot of great VCs. Also, we've been identifying really interesting managers early. Mm-hmm. We're big believers in seed investing. So, we've been investing in smaller seed funds for over 15 years. And so, some of those managers have grown to be significant funds, as large funds over time, and we've continued with them. But on the, certainly on the fund of fund side, the vast majority of our money is actually invested in North America and Western Europe.
There's a lot of GPs that listen to this pod. If someone was to say, hey, why are you guys the right partner as an LP for a seed fund, if that's the target in particular, what's the kind of, short pitch so they can hear it?
We have one of the highest re-up rates that I know of. So, all we do is venture investing. So we're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and say, hey, we don't like technology. Let's invest in, funds that invest in trees, right? Like, this is what we do. This is all we do. This is what we're passionate about. This is what we love. That's it, right? That's the asset we offer to our investor base. So, we're long-term players. Because this is all we do, we've got a fair bit of data that we try to be helpful to the funds with about best practices, what works, what doesn't work. And so we get a lot of phone calls from our GPs, and we present ideas to them around what's the right strategy when it comes to, say, reserve management or, how you should build the portfolio, et cetera. Another thing, of course, that we do is we get approached a lot by companies because they know we're a fund of funds. They also know that we are deep into various kinds of technologies, and they ask us which funds should they go to, and we've we're a source of deal flow for a lot of the funds as well. And then finally, we're helpful to the funds companies, right? We've just give you a sense of that value plus I mentioned before. We have generated over $200 million in revenue for startups through introductions. We've made over 280 purchase orders, and we haven't taken a dime from any. So
that's a hell of a stat.
It's differentiating. So what we're trying to do is we're saying, okay, just like it, I would say almost what Andreessen is trying to do for their companies, we're trying to do for our GPs and try to be as helpful as we possibly can. So we're trying to make our money, quite frankly, greener than the next.
Alan, before we started recording, you and I were kind of hitting it off, talking about firm culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you were dropping some wisdom that everyone would benefit from. So I'm going to take you back to that. How do you think about culture in Vintage internally within the team? And is it important to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every time all of us look at companies for investment, and I've been, in the investment world for 35 years, you're always looking at the people, right? You're always looking, what's the dynamic? What's the founder like? What's the dynamic between the founders? We're all looking at the culture of the organization we're investing in. We don't invest enough time in looking at the culture of our own organizations. How do we relate to our partners? How do we relate to all the people in our team? And I think one of the important things that I learned is, there's a number of funds that I have seen that, manage themselves as an aggregate of a bunch of individual GPs. What we found, at least in our case, is there is a real case for 1 + 1 = 3. I think we make better investment decisions when we can be honest and open with one another. I think we make better follow-on investment decisions. And so what we've attempted to do is build a culture where we can speak extremely openly, very candidly, but everybody knows it's coming from the right place. So I've been looking, when I was building Vintage, it was extremely important for me that I find people whose egos are, well contained, and are self-reflective. So, as I mentioned to you before, one of the things we do when we go offsite 3 times a year, I always start with the crappy investments I made. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of those. And that allows, and then everybody starts piping in with what they, haven't, what they've invested in that wasn't working. And then we have, we can look at, what did we do right? And what did we do wrong as a firm? And I think the importance of, first of all, taking individual responsibility in what you've done, but also at the same time, on the other side of it, giving collective praise for the decision making and making those, working together on deals and feeling that you're part of a team, I think is also important. The other thing that I think on the firm building side, as I mentioned to you, I'm just turned 62 a couple of weeks ago. And, as the founder of Vintage, it's really important both to our LPs, to the GPs, and to the people who work at Vintage that, there be continuation. And I've spoken to a lot of people about how you deal with issues like succession, how you build the firm so that, that it survives you. And I've spent I actually wrote a blog about this 7 years ago, saying when I was 55, this is what I'm planning on doing. And that's exactly what I've been doing. So, and so having that sense of, hey, I'm going to make myself irrelevant. And so the firm can become, can survive you is also, I think, part of it. And it comes from the same thing. You've got to be able to learn how to put your ego in the right places. It's not easy, but
Amen.
you have no choice.
I want to just yes and share with you. We're cut from similar fabric, it seems. I'm a member of YPO. We do a lot of EQ programs in that where you're trying to really get vulnerable in a quick way, which is very hard for people. I don't know if it's as common in other cultures, but for Americans, I think generally it's very challenging to kind of break through the barriers. Um, there's an exercise called a lifeline, where an individual will get 15 minutes uninterrupted to tell their personal life story, the best thing and the worst thing in 5-year increments. So that usually encompasses all the trauma, like the literal worst things that people do not discuss. At our retreats, in our core team, our partnership, we do lifelines,
I
and
love that
usually
idea. Great
usually
idea.
results in actually some of the people crying because they're
Yeah.
talking about parents passing away, cancer, all sorts of traumatic abuses, and um, I think you can't just show up one day and say, "Hey, we're going to have a culture where people share." You have to have a baseline of trust. But if you can get to that vulnerability really builds connection. And then when you get to things like making a bad business decision, who cares, right? Like, did you do your best? Like there's a baseline.
It's interesting you mention this because a few years back, this past year was, my father had passed away when I was 11. And uh, this past year was 50 years since he passed away. And I always said to myself, wait a minute, that must have affected who I am as a human being. And I decided to do some research a year ago that I decided to interview venture-backed CEOs who had been very, very successful, to ask about their lives before they were 18. We tend to, in a lot of cases when we meet entrepreneurs, all right, where did you go to school? Tell us about your work history. I think what really has a massive impact on an entrepreneur is actually, how did they grow up? What was the dynamic? So I did this survey and I'm in the process of completing it. But did you have a traumatic experience? How did you deal with it as a child? Did you grow up rich? Did you grow up middle class? Did you grow up poor? What number child were you? Birth order has a big influence. Did you play competitive sports? Was it team sports? Was it individual sports? Did you work as a kid? All sorts of questions. I had a list of about 15 or 20 questions, and it was fascinating. Yeah, I've got to do the control group of the guys who didn't succeed, but of the ones who did succeed, over 80% of them had a traumatic experience in their childhood that was incredibly important in defining who they are as human beings. And the message that I got from all this, and I shared it with my partners afterward, was I don't think we're doing the right thing by only talking to people. Like, life doesn't begin at 8. And who that person is and what's molded them is probably even more important than what school they went to, and more important even sometimes than their work experience. Because look, it's not easy to be an entrepreneur. It's hard to be. And, in my 35 years of investing, I don't remember a seed company that I ever met that was exactly the strategy that they ended up having, executing on. In other words, there was constant pivot. There was constant things that were thrown at them along the way. And it's interesting to see, does he or she have the ability to take all these things that are thrown at you along the way and adjust accordingly? And seeing what they did before they're 18, you learn a lot about that issue.
I'm pretty sure I interview at least 500 people a year for roles that we're hiring for. And I use the same interview questions, and I have been for the past decade. And I try to keep them very secret because I don't want to give anyone a cheat sheet. But again, another similarity. One of the things I actually ask people is, who were they in high school? If I bumped to one of their friends in high school and I was like, who the hell is Steve or Sally? How would
Great.
they describe you? Um,
Travis.
it's it's far more fascinating,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And you can start to pattern match too, right? I don't know if you found this, but I found that there was a lot of people when I first started in business. It was like learning how to walk again. I kind of
Mm-hmm.
set aside all my predispositions and assumptions and cultural expectations
Mm-hmm.
and was stumbling through it. And then the light bulb went off, and I realized that the same social cues I could use in high school and college applied in talent
Yeah.
decisions on teams. Uh, and so when you get childhood stories, it helps you find a narrative to figure out, this person faced adversity and succeeded through it. The same kind of narratives we were inspired by socially.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's so crucial. And I don't think people put enough emphasis on it. At the end of the day, it's almost a marriage when you invest in an entrepreneur. You're going to be with that person for at least, chances are for at least a decade. Right. And it's amazing to what extent we don't understand who they are as human beings. We focus too much, I'm not minimizing the importance of product and I'm not minimizing the importance of market, but I don't think we focus nearly enough as investors on who that person is. I look at, again, I mentioned I've done a lot of lousy investments in my career, but if I was to pinpoint where I made my mistakes, it was because I got the people wrong. And I didn't understand them and their ability to adjust and to listen to, there's no question. And I think we don't, as an industry, we don't put enough emphasis on it. By the way, as I mentioned, we got to also look in the mirror and apply it to our own firms, right? Are we recruiting the right people? Are we recruiting people who can also adjust? I mean, every venture fund is also going through dramatic shifts and ups and downs in marketplaces and, the market conditions, et cetera. So, we also have to be recruiting people and partners who can adjust and be, true partners even in difficult times.
Alan, we're going to talk today, obviously, about the conflict between Israel and Hamas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have thought of a more beautiful way to kind of set up a little bit of getting to know you before we get into something so delicate than to hear the way you think about empathy and kind of the EQ just in micro interactions in your life.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I think a lot of people don't know about Israel is it's actually a fairly diverse society. It's not entirely Jewish people. It's
right.
10 to 20% Arab, if I believe that's correct.
Yeah, it's 20%. Yeah.
20%, right? Pretty significant chunk of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Before we kind of move into the broader paradigm that's happening with the conflict and how it's affecting the startup community out in Israel, can you give us a little bit of a microcosm?
Yeah, sure.
With a population that's 20% Arab, 80%. I'm assuming that most of the rest is just. I know there's some Christians there as well. What does that translate to on your team at Vintage?
So one of the things that first of all, I'm a big believer in diversity. Period. Right. I'm not diversity where you're trying to put a check mark on having a person from a certain background, but equality of opportunity. And in every time we're recruiting for somebody, we're always trying to make sure that we're taking candidates and looking at candidates from multiple areas. So one of the things I'm proud about Vintage is we have a number of people on our team who come from the Palestinian Israeli community. And I did that on, I thought that was extremely important rather. And I even helped create a recruitment firm on a philanthropic basis that would help try and bring people from the Palestinian Israeli community into the high-tech industry. I also started a nonprofit called Power and Diversity Israel for that purpose. And I'll tell you why. First of all, I think our firm is better. I think firms are better that you have more diverse populations. But frankly, I have another agenda, which is I would rather people look at this person as my friend from work and not my enemy. And I think one of the, amazing opportunities that we could see here, is if we could do much more effort around integrating people from the Israeli Arab, Palestinian Israeli community into the high tech industry as a way to break down some of those barriers. And I've been spending the last 10 years, actually, been probably 25 years, I should say, working on it. I think it's extremely important. One of the most impressive people I've ever met in my life is a man called Alan Feld. You should, I would recommend you interview him at some point. Eyal was the founder of a company called Mellanox, which was bought by NVIDIA and, built it into a hugely successful business, $7 billion in revenue. Eyal consciously built R&D centers in Gaza, Ramallah, Hebron, and Nablus. And it was because he wanted to say, I want to give people an opportunity, and I believe that if we can strengthen that business, strengthen economically those communities, it will help break down some of these barriers. Well, unfortunately, Eyal's daughter was killed on October 7th. She was at the peace party, and she and her fiance or future husband were murdered on that day. And probably one of the most moving experiences, I can remember was being at that funeral and Eyal standing over the grave of his daughter and his future son-in-law saying, we have to get rid of Hamas. Hamas is, a huge obstacle to peace. But when Hamas is gone, I want to go back down to Gaza and help rebuild. And I think about that, right? His daughter's just been, this is 2 days after she was slaughtered, right? I think a lot of us in the high tech community in particular feel very strongly that we have to find a way to live together in this region. And we believe that technology, that investment, that partnership is a really great way to do it. We've done it internally in Vintage, but I believe that it's something we have to do at a country level, right, with the Palestinian-Israeli community, much more intensely. And second, to do it regionally. One other project that Vintage, together with a well-known family from the Arab community, we started an incubator to train Palestinian Israeli entrepreneurs to be entrepreneurs, to help get them going. And I think that economic empowerment, that bringing people together is what the future of, or should be the future of this region.
I don't have a full sense of it from the outside. I encounter a lot of Israeli entrepreneurs. Has the Palestinian, Israel, Arab Israeli community broken in to the tech cycle?
Yeah, it's starting to do it. So 22%, over 22% of the, which is a much bigger percentage of population, of the students in engineering at Technion, which is Israel's leading technology university, come from the Arab Israeli community, right? So, on the contrary, I think what's happening is we're seeing more and more people from that community getting into the high tech industry. You see them at Apple, you see them at Intel, you see, et cetera. And again, we made sure that they've got opportunities at all of our companies, right? Because we think that's fundamental. So I think there's a big change. And I think one of the nice things, again, that's happened in the last 10 years during a difficult period is the beginning of this integration.
Alan, this is a loaded moment in time for everybody on all sides of this conflict, or people not even involved. It's very loaded. Just to get some context as we kind of go a little deeper, has your family or any close friends been directly affected?
Yeah, I mean, I've unfortunately, friend of person who I'm very, very close with, two of his sons were killed on October 7th. I have another friend whose son was killed on October 7th. I have other friends whose kids have been killed since. It's not a simple time. It's a hard time, and on a personal basis. Look, at the end of the day, as I say, we've got to find a way to live together. And I believe that, if we can succeed Hamas out, but also at the same time, some of the very extreme people that we've got, and put them to the side and start working together on a genuine solution, I think there's room. I think, it's not a simple thing. I don't think people understand how complicated this region is and the whole conflict is. But I'm hopeful that that this very difficult, especially this very difficult couple of months, will sort of knock a bunch of heads together and say, okay, folks, let's try and figure out a way to make this work.
And we're all hoping. We get very different media in the U.S. Than the Israelis are consuming. I consume a little of both in an effort to understand this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an Israeli view right now on how long the conflict's going to go on?
Yeah, no one really knows. I mean, at the end of the day, look, I think it's fundamental that, and it's absolutely critical that Hamas be removed from power and the hostages be released. I mean, there's nothing more. That is the fundamental issue. If Hamas was gone tomorrow and the hostages were released, this conflict would be over, right? I mean, it wouldn't have happened in the first place, right? So, I genuinely believe that that's the first stage. And I think once that happens, and I wish it would happen somehow through negotiations, that Hamas leaves the region and gets out of this whole thing. We have to think about how we rebuild the Palestinian economy. A lot of people don't realize also that, southern Israel's been decimated by this. Unfortunately, in Lebanon, Hezbollah has taken advantage of what's been going on and has been firing on northern Israel. And there are 250,000 people displaced in the northern part of the country. And so, we have to get the conflict over, get people back and start rebuilding. And I think it's rebuilding here also, because the south of Israel was literally, the Hamas people really destroyed, a good chunk of the border communities. And we have to also start rebuilding gas, and in a positive. So I'm hopeful that, we can figure out partners on both sides. And both sides have a lot of work to do to make sure we get the right people together to get to the next stage.
So just shifting this to kind of impact on the startup community for a bit,
Sure.
Because very important part of the Israeli economy is the tech sector.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book about the water industry there as well right now, but let's focus on tech. What percentage? I mean, it's a unique country in that, we don't have a mandatory conscription in the U.S. where you're 18, you're in the military.
Mm-hmm.
That exists for male and female in Israel,
Mm-hmm.
not for everybody, but for most.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage of folks in the economy right now are on military duty? Right? Is it?
I don't know the exact percentage, but I can tell you that a lot of people are serving in reserve duties in some capacity, whether it's protecting in the border up north, or filling various roles, or medical roles or whatever. Obviously reserve duty in the south. But there's no question it has an impact. But one of the things I think is amazing is this country is very resilient. And I think what people have done is they're doing a lot more with actually a lot less. So even though we have people who, have been called up, we're still, so you work hard, just to get stuff done, and make sure everything is completed and everything's, working and everything's effective, et cetera. By the way, just, the other thing a lot of people don't realize that, of the people who were killed on October 7th, and it, there's this perception again, it's, Israeli Jews who are, right, 46% of those people were Muslim, were Israeli Muslim. And, some of the people who are hostages are also Israeli Muslims. So this is not, only a quote Jew versus Muslim. This is, something that we as Jews and Muslims within Israel are experiencing. Similarly, there's a number of people from the Bedouin community, which is a Muslim community, and the Druze community, which is not a Jewish community, who are serving in the army, in the Israeli army, also defending the country, right? So they too have been called up as part of the service. So it's not, it's not just, quote, some people have characterized this as a battle of religions. It's not. It's a bunch of people living in this country trying to defend it.
So, framing the startup operations for a second. So, you guys are on night shift type situation.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, you're working
80%
hard.
of people are at the office. Everyone's kind of rolling up their sleeves and doubling down.
Everybody's resilient. I mean, look, the venture
has it felt like the economy's kind of slowed down a little bit, or trains are still running on time?
Deals are still happening. Deals are still happening. By the way, just as an aside, I can tell you this past year, if you look at the M&A activity this year, the level of M&A activity in relative to the previous year is actually on a relative basis, say, to the decline we've seen in M&A in the UK, in the US, and the decline we've seen in M&A in Europe. The decline in M&A here is not anywhere close. In other words, it's actually companies are being bought. There have been several very large deals. In 2006, when we had this war with Lebanon, after two soldiers were kidnapped out from the Israeli border, there was literally a war, and Warren Buffett bought Iskar, which was 10 kilometers away from the border. This is a incredibly resilient country. So, foreign investors continue to invest. Companies continue to be bought. Sorry. Yeah, you can. Companies continue to be bought.
Right.
And so it's not a, things have hardly come to a stop. Now, having said all that, you still.
It's so bizarre to hear that when you're seeing the pictures on the outside.
No, correct.
Country still functions.
I don't want to. I also don't want to, paint a picture that doesn't exist. Right. I mean, it's difficult. Right. I mean, everybody here is, and this is a small country, right? People have lost people. They've got people, in harm's way. You still do get rockets. We're still getting rockets today being fired. But this is an incredibly resilient population that says we're not giving up. We're not, and frankly, we have nowhere to go. Right? So we're here to make it work. We want to find a way to work with our neighbors and work with our fellow citizens and make this what it should be, which is, could be an example of how people work together and live together rather than the conflict we're in now.
So I think the Monday after October 7 was the 9th.
Yeah.
Obviously, the world changed.
Yeah.
What's the message you were disseminating or folks were disseminating out to CEOs? So someone's running a startup after a crisis. What's the lesson learned, or how do you operate in the expected austerity that comes after that?
I think, it goes back to what we started off with the beginning of the conversation, right? We talked about how some of the best entrepreneurs are people who have had challenges when they were young. We're they call us the startup nation, right? So, same thing. We have to pivot. We have to figure out, despite everything that's going on, how do we make life go on? How do we make life go on for our families? How do we make our economy continue to be successful? What do we do to make, frankly, the world a better place? I don't think as hard as October 7th was, and it was a traumatic day. It was a huge watershed moment in this country. It is really unbelievable to see how, people went back to work right away, how, despite everything, people are doing whatever they can to make, themselves and the country successful. But again, look, this is not the first time we've had conflict in this region, right? We've seen it since the country was formed, right? So, I would say, unfortunately, we're used to it. But you see the resilience of the population. And also you see the hope. I mean, people are hopeful that we can figure out a way to make this work. People don't give up. I mean, one of the things that, as an entrepreneur, right, it's a pretty crazy thing to do, right, to be an entrepreneur. And if you ever give up hope, you're going to shut your business down. Well, and you don't want to give up that hope. You want to keep, fighting to make sure that your business survives. Well, that's what we are as a country. That's, I think, one of the reasons they call it Startup Nation, because, we have to constantly reinvent ourselves to ensure that this place survives.
This conflict has opened up a little bit of Pandora's box and even changed lots of perspectives about the region, right? Anti-Semitism is a popular word in the media right now in the U.S. There's people with very strong opinions, even if it's not related to anti-Semitism, just about policies and how the conflict's being executed on both sides. And it's very complicated. Have you noticed any change in the broader business community's interaction with Israel? Have the LP tone changed? Has the customer set signaled any differences because of the conflict that you've noticed?
We have not. I mean, I've not seen anything yet material. I mean, obviously, people's willing, not everybody's flying over here in the middle of, the conflict. I mean, otherwise people are visiting here, frequently. But again, but so you go to them, right? I mean, I think that the vast majority, at least the vast majority of people we've been speaking to have been, share at least my perspective on things, which is we've got to figure out a way that everybody lives together. But I think people understand that, Hamas is at least the people I speak to and who understand the conflict, who have been here before, have, talked to Israelis, and, not form their views only by what they see on TikTok or on X, right? But actually come here, talk to Israelis, understand the conflict. And same matter, talk to Palestinians. Talk to Palestinian Israelis, right? I think, they realize that this is a complicated conflict that should be resolved. And there's some really good people trying to resolve. We've all got people are getting in the way of that resolution, including people on our side. But I think that, at least what I've seen in the tech community, right, is that, and the people I talk to all want to try and find a way to get to that next stage. And I think that message has gotten across to both LPs, investors, to business people globally.
This pod gets picked up in a lot of different geographies, but it's obviously concentrated in the U.S. Any key message you kind of wish Americans were hearing that maybe is getting lost in translation?
Yeah. There's a huge amount of disinformation that's going on about who everybody is in this conflict. I think there's a huge amount of disinformation about Hamas as an organization and what it's done, not just to Israelis, but to Palestinians. And I wish that people would share with us in let's get Hamas out and let's do all we can to make sure we get to the next stage of rebuilding the Palestinian territories and figure out a way we can get this thing to peace and do what we can to build leadership on both sides that are going to get us there. So don't give up on us. Not everything in life is black and white. It's not this guy or right. There's a lot of gray in this whole issue. And as I've said, even here, right? I don't look at this as only these guys are bad or only these guys are good. There's a lot of stuff we got to fix. And I see it even in our own organization, right? I mean, people, the Palestinians and Israelis who are working in Vintage, they may have different views about different things, but we all know that at the end of the day, we figure out a way to work together. Then why can't we that should also, happen in a national level. So maybe it will be the micro relationships that may expand. But, I think the message is, let's get the extremes out, and let's do what we can to make sure that Israel is safe, Palestinians get the right solution for them, and we move forward.
Thank you very much for being on, Alan.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Big thanks to Alan for coming on and chatting. Every time we chat, I feel like I learned something. I thought that was a real wonderful conversation in a lot of dimensions. Hopefully it was helpful to the entrepreneurs and VCs listening. A lot of nuance and perspective in there about just generally leadership and investing. With that, we'll catch you next week.